My name is Alex, and I am no longer the man who stepped onto the icy shores of the Svalbard archipelago a year ago. I used to consider myself a conqueror, someone who negotiated with nature using modern membrane fabrics, titanium crampons, and satellite navigators. 12 years in polar photography had taught me to respect the ice, but they had also burdened me with that specific, almost religious self-confidence that sooner or later becomes a fatal trap for every professional. I had come there for the shot of a lifetime, for that exact moment when the polar night, which had lasted for months, finally meets the first timid ray of sun over a fjord frozen in eternity. It was meant to be my perfect, extreme career finale, the closing chord of my portfolio. But nature decided to conduct its own masterclass in survival. Everything fell apart in mere seconds, and there was a haunting mundanity to it. My snowmobile, a steel beast with 100 horsepower, suddenly plummeted into a crevice hidden by fresh snow, one I hadn't noticed due to fatigue and whiteout conditions. I managed to jump clear at the last second, feeling the void open beneath my boots, but the machine, along with my entire world, satellite phone, a week's supply of food, fuel, and warm spare clothing, dropped 10 meters down. I heard it battering against the icy walls, making a sound like the moan of a wounded animal until it wedged somewhere in the impenetrable darkness of the rift. I was left with only my backpack, a Hasselblad camera, one half-empty spare battery, a hunting knife, a stove with a jammed valve, and a lightweight tent I had brought just in case for short rests. The temperature dropped to minus 42 degrees Celsius almost instantly after the twilight finally swallowed the horizon. The wind, which local hunters call the breath of the dead, began to knock me off my feet, piercing through even the most expensive down jacket. I was 30 kilometers from the nearest base, with a knee damaged during the jump that pulsed with a dull ache, and an absolute inability to send an SOS signal. The battle for my mind proved harder than the battle for my body. When you find yourself alone in such a void, the silence begins to make strange noises. It presses against your eardrums, turning into a high-pitched ultrasonic whistle that makes you want to tear your ears open. I tried to pitch the tent, but the wind, like a maddened beast, shredded its thin nylon in 10 minutes, leaving me naked before the face of Arctic hell. Then I remembered the stories of the old Pomors. If you cannot defeat the cold, you must become part of it. I began to dig. My fingers, despite professional gloves, quickly lost sensation, turning into disobedient wooden sticks. I literally gnawed into the hard-packed snow with my knife, using my elbows and teeth to help, creating a narrow burrow, my last line of defense. When I finally crawled inside, blocking the entrance with my backpack, I realized this was only a reprieve. It was cramped inside, like a coffin. My own breath instantly turned to frost on the walls, showering my face with tiny needles. To keep from falling into a sleep that always ends in death in these lands, I started talking to my camera. "Look, old girl," I whispered, stroking the cold metal of the body. "Now we'll set the aperture to 8 and make the shutter speed as long as possible. You want to see the sun, don't you?" I recalled every Hasselblad model I had ever held, every technical specification of the Zeiss lenses. These details were my anchors. They kept my consciousness from drifting into the open ocean of madness where the shadows of the past already waited. On the second day, true hunger arrived, but it was a trifle compared to the thirst. The brain refused to function without water. I tried to warm bits of ice in my mouth, but it was a mistake. My tongue instantly stuck to the ice, and my throat tightened with spasms. Hallucinations began, vivid and merciless. The walls of my snow burrow suddenly expanded, and I saw the apartment of my childhood. I smelled the toasted bread and butter my mother used to make. I saw the steam rising from her old blue pot. I saw friends laughing in a warm bar and felt the taste of tart red wine on my lips. I reached out for this warmth, but my fingers touched only rough ice. The wind outside changed its voice. It no longer howled. It sang in a gentle female voice, promising that if I just went out and lay on the snow, I would finally be warm. This was hypothermic euphoria. To resist, I took my knife and slowly drove it into my thigh. Not deep, but the sharp, salty pain pierced the fog in my head. I screamed from the pain, and my scream brought me back to reality. Pain was the only proof that I was still alive. When the third day came, I felt my body's resources were exhausted. My muscles began to twitch involuntarily, and then came the terrible stage: absolute silence within the organism. This meant the blood had retreated from the limbs to protect the heart and brain. I knew, if I didn't leave now, this burrow would become my crypt. Emerging onto the surface felt like a painful birth. The world outside was perfectly white, sterile, and absolutely indifferent to my existence. I began to crawl toward the base, though my knee no longer ached. It had simply turned into a heavy, foreign weight. I counted every inch. 1, 2, 3. At the 100th step, I fell face down into the snow. I lay there for a long time, watching a tiny Arctic fox that had stopped 5 meters away, waiting for my death. Its yellow eyes were full of calm interest. "Not today, you son of a bitch," I wheezed, pushing up on my elbows. Suddenly, I noticed my tripod, which had fallen out earlier. It became my support, my crutch, my chance. And then, the sky shuddered with the sound of a helicopter. It was the sound of life. The blades sliced through the frost-nipped air, but they were flying too far away. The rescuers weren't looking for me. They were searching for a group of tourists missing in a different square. I had one chance. I pulled out the camera, wiped the frost from the lens, and began to catch the low Arctic sun. I aimed the sunbeam toward where I thought the pilot's cockpit was. It was a desperate game of light and shadow. They noticed. The giant iron bird turned around. When they pulled me on board, I clung to the camera so tightly that the rescuers had to pry my fingers open by force. I spent a month in the hospital in Longyearbyen. I remember only white walls and an unbearable searing pain as the nerves in my legs began to wake up. It felt as if my feet were being slowly dipped into boiling lead. Doctors managed to save almost everything except for 2 toes on my left foot, but it was a small price to pay. The return to civilization was long and painful. For the first few weeks, I couldn't be in a room with an air conditioner. The sound of the working fan reminded me of the whistle of the wind in the glacier's rift. I couldn't look at ice in a glass of water. To everyone else, it was just for cooling, but to me, it was the element that nearly swallowed my soul. I remember my first trip to the supermarket. I stood in front of the bread shelf and felt a panic attack from the sheer, overwhelming choice. All of it seemed so meaningless and excessive after I had dreamed of a crumb of a frozen energy bar as if it were the ultimate reward. Now, my Hasselblad with its shattered lens sits in a place of honor in my office. I didn't have it repaired. This mangled piece of metal is my visual proof that even the most expensive things only have value when they help you survive. Recently, David, the rescuer who descended for me on the hoist, called me. He said, "You know, Max, we pull a lot of people out, but few look at us the way you did. Most are just terrified. But you looked like you had understood something." And he was right. I understood that we live in an illusion of control. We think we are the masters of the planet because we have GPS and central heating. But it only takes one button being switched off for you to find yourself face to face with the primordial darkness once again. I no longer photograph landscapes. Now, I photograph people. I look for that same spark in their eyes that I tried to see in myself that night. Because true beauty isn't found in snow-capped peaks or sunsets. True beauty is the will that forces a person to take one more step when their legs can no longer move. Tonight, I will go out onto the terrace again. I will take a cup of hot tea, real tea, with lemon, the kind I raved about in my hallucinations. I will watch as the twilight slowly swallows the mountains. I know that out there, the wind is whistling again, and the temperature is dropping to lethal levels. I respect those mountains. I even love them. But now I know their secret. They aren't evil. They are simply waiting for those who have forgotten what it means to be alive. I take a sip of tea and feel the warmth spreading through my body. It is the best feeling in the world, just to feel the warmth, just to know that tomorrow, the sun will rise again. Months passed, and the tea on my terrace began to taste less like a miracle and more like a habit. That is the danger of survival. The world eventually tries to lull you back into the same illusion of safety you almost died shedding. My legs still throbbed when the barometric pressure dropped, a rhythmic reminder of the snow grave. But my soul began to itch for something the city couldn't provide. I didn't want the perfect shot anymore, but I needed to face the silence one last time. I booked a ticket back to Longyearbyen, not in the winter, but in the late spring when the sun never sets. Stepping off the small plane, the smell of the Arctic hit me, dry, ozone-heavy, and indifferent. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Every instinct told me to turn back, to hide in the heated cabin of the airport. But I walked toward the terminal. I wasn't there to climb. I was there to meet David, the man who had pulled me from the brink. We met in a small wooden cafe overlooking the harbor. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man who had seen too much and said too little. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the ice floes drift like broken teeth in the dark water. "I brought something for you," I said, handing him a small box. Inside was a print of a photograph I had taken a month prior. It wasn't a mountain. It was a close-up of a candle flame, the wax melting in a way that looked like a weeping glacier. David looked at it for a long time. "You captured the heat," he whispered. "Most people only see the light." The next day, I hired a guide, not to take me to the crevasse, but to a safe ridge overlooking the valley where I had nearly become a permanent resident of the ice. As I stood there, leaning on my cane, the wind began to pick up. For a second, my lungs seized. The phantom cold of -40 degrees rushed back into my chest. I closed my eyes, expecting the hallucinations to start, expecting to hear my mother's voice or smell the phantom bread. But there was nothing. Only the raw, honest sound of the wind. I realized then that the mountains hadn't tried to kill me. They simply didn't care if I lived. And in that indifference, I found a strange, terrifying freedom. If the universe didn't care about my survival, then my survival was my masterpiece. Every breath I took was an act of defiance, a small, stubborn fire burning in the middle of an infinite freezer. I pulled out my new camera, a simple, sturdy model, nothing like the heavy Hasselblad on my shelf. I didn't wait for the light to be perfect. I didn't wait for the golden hour. I took a photo of David's rescue team as they prepared for a routine drill. I captured the steam rising from their mouths, the tension in their ropes, the grit in their eyes. I wasn't a conqueror anymore. I was a witness to the fragile, beautiful tenacity of being human. As I boarded the plane to go home, I looked out the window at the receding peaks of Svalbard. I whispered a silent thank you to the ice. It had taken 2 of my toes and my ego, but it had given me back my life. I knew now that I would never be truly warm again, not in the way people who have never been cold are warm. There would always be a small piece of ice in the corner of my heart. But that's okay, because now, when I walk into my house and flip the switch, I don't just see a light bulb turning on. I see a victory. And as I drift off to sleep in my warm bed, I listen to the wind outside, and for the first time in a year, I don't shudder. I just breathe. One more step.